Day 35. Oh, it's all happening so quickly. I cannot believe that we're already middle of July. It's actually ridiculous. And today was one of those days where I really didn't feel like doing a video because I was just hanging out at home the whole day and I was just so in relaxation. But since I just had to get my act together and make a post that I wanted to make, I decided to come on camera anyway and honor my commitment and show up here. It's interesting because this commitment, it's as everything, it's me versus me. I made a commitment to me, right? It's not about anything else. It's my relationship with myself, whether, how will I take it if I don't show up one day to my own commitment? Will I judge myself? Will I feel like a failure? It's such a, everything that we experience is our relationship with ourselves. And I speak about that often. And I just also listened to some really beautiful people that I followed that talked a lot about the fact that everything that we experience is our own projection on reality. We take the inner, like the story that we have about life and our self-concept, and we project it onto the outer world. So even when we try, what I study relationships, and what's so interesting for me when I catch myself, and then obviously it's so much easier to see with my clients, so much of our suffering is our own projections about what people are doing or thinking or what they're doing to us. But in fact, it's a complete fantasy because we never really know what's in the mind of the other person. We're barely making sense of our own minds. So everything that we expect or anticipate, or the way we interpret behavior of the other or life events in general, has to do with our own shade of perception. Whatever it is that our culture conditioned us with, whatever it is that our own family has conditioned us with, the expectations, beliefs about the world, about life, that's what we project out there, right? And a lot of that story that is projected out has to do with our self-concept. And a lot of our self-concept is so judgmental. It's so intolerant. It's so mean. I mean, if you're not sure, look at yourself in the mirror, right? Our bodies are exactly the way they should be, like in nature. This is how nature created us. And yet, when we look at our body, we'll look at it, through a prism of our perception. And that prism of perception, there is a lot of judgment and a lot of filter, and we immediately compare it to cultural standards and our family standards and traditional standards, etc., etc. And there's just so much suffering that actually has not anything to do with the actual truth. And a lot of the stories that we impose on the way we interpret life and other people's behavior toward us and our own feelings has a lot to do with supporting the story we have. Our beliefs, we often confuse our beliefs with the truth, and our beliefs are not the truth. Our beliefs are just frequently repeated thoughts that we just assume are the truth. What our parents told us when we were kids, or where some other influential figures in our lives or outer authority have told us. We just assume it as truth, but it's not. It's not, truth is nature. Anything that is not nature, so our hating our bodies, is not the truth. It's that perception, it's that twisted, judgmental perception of reality. So yeah, a lot of that suffering, a lot of our fear is also projected. Like very often, it's a constant. The way I observe it in myself, it's a constant. I mitigate all the time the mental perceptions, which are often either in future or in the past, and my actual body, which is in the present moment. So very often, many of us are disconnected from our bodies, so we're not really able to ground ourselves in the present moment. It takes a lot of discipline to do that, and many of us are just not equipped or haven't yet trained ourselves to understand what that means, to ground in reality, to ground in present moment. So we're constantly transported somewhere else in our mind. A lot of our fear, a lot of our anticipation of future has to do with our again, that story about the world that we're projecting out. Do we think it's a friendly place? Is universe friendly? Then we'll have one interpretation. If we think universe is dangerous and precarious and we need to protect ourselves, then we'll interpret everything and events in another way. And whatever story we impose on reality, it's our own invention. Very often it's just fantasy. And what we perceive about other people is also just fantasy and our own interpretation. So very often, so much suffering in our relationships, and this is what I've been observing in my case, obviously. That's where I always start, is we assume that other people view the world in the same way that we do. And they don't. Because even, my husband is from the same culture. He was raised in similar sort of basic culture that I was. Both of us were born in the Soviet Union, but his family is so dramatically different from mine. And their interpretation, their relationship with money, their relationship with men, women, what family means, everything is so different than mine. So there are some cultural similarities and references, but there is also a lot that is different. So me, for majority of our life together before my awakening, I was projecting on him certain expectations and understandings about the world and the role of a woman and a man and what is normal. And he was in a completely different headspace, and he was viewing the world in a completely different, through a completely different prism. And if we don't communicate, which most of us do not, we just have all these assumptions and unwritten rules. And so we live with a person thinking that we think in the same way, but we really don't. And we're not even like on the same wavelength half of the time. Although even sometimes when we do, even sometimes when we do think that we're on the same wavelength, it's energetic, and that's actually beautiful when we can reach that level of connection. But our thoughts are not necessarily the same, We can still perceive things differently and connect on an energetic level. So yeah, just really wanted to, this is what I've been thinking a lot about today and in the last several days, because I'm trying to understand some of my own patterns with life. And I find myself in a lot of frustration that there are still some patterns in my life that I cannot quite break out of. And I think it's because, the way I've been dealing with these certain situations, they're so steeped in my projections that I haven't yet been able to look at it from another point of view, another angle that is not quite, sort of to break out of my conditioning, to break out of my own perception, and to see it from a larger perspective, a larger point of view. And that's why we need coaches, and that's why we need people outside of us, because they get to see the blind spots that we don't see in ourselves, because our conditioning is transparent for us. And a lot of our conditioning is what basically all that we perceive as problems in our lives are all our own interpretations. and that judgment, that constant judgment that we filter everything through, causes a lot of our own suffering, and often it's not the truth, not the reality. A lot of what my work is with my clients, especially when we are connected through writing as well, is I get to show them where they sort of bring themselves into a dead end, because my perspective is different than theirs, because my conditioning is different, and because also I have this capacity to reframe things, having gone through a bunch of my own crises. So I also obviously work with coaches and guides and mentors so that they can help me catch my blind spots and the places where I no longer see, where I get stuck. So really be aware of everything that you experience, especially when it comes to suffering. We have a tendency to project all that onto the outside, and it's not out there. It's our own inner world, and it's really, really tricky to catch it, but it's imperative for our liberation. I read something yesterday. Liberation is freeing our life from the story that we've sort of imposed on it, like the box that we've imposed on it. Yeah, and it feels really, really right. All right, everyone. See you tomorrow.